just the links with empire, and then why these links begin to fall apart. There's yet another way in which the loose Anglo-Irish theme makes sense. And that is the notion of Anglicisation, which, as we know, has been, loosely stated, a major preoccupation with successive London governments. That is, from the 12th century on, I suppose, certainly from the 16th century and on through the 18th and 19th century. That is, to bring in English law, English customs, English manners, and even English haircuts. The person was talking about Spencer and his dislike of Irish haircuts. To make Ireland like England, or to make Ireland like New Zealand in the Northern Hemisphere. It's a major preoccupation for a long, long time. The problem here, of course, is that, but I think it's a useful problem to probe, is that Anglicisation is a two-way process. That is to say, there's impulses coming from London, but there's impulses coming from Dublin and Cork and Belfast and Galway as well. So what emerges is neither Anglicised nor Hibernicized. It's a sort of a hybrid of the two. And that's essentially the sort of structure of society which we end up with in the present day. Sort of a hybrid society, neither one thing nor the other, but very much a reflection of the historical experience of the people on this island. Let's leave Ireland and England for a moment and look at another struggle, because you probably will be gathering that a theme is my notion of Irish history is a conflict model. That's what I would be trying to pursue. But another conflict is that between Catholic and Protestant, or to put it broadly, a religious conflict, a confessional struggle, seems to make Irish history move along. It seems to offer the dynamo which keeps Irish history ticking over and which advances the whole sort of the historical actors. Catholic versus Protestant, though like that, since I said I start in 431, that's a religious context for that. That's Palladius' visit to Ireland, allegedly. 432, St. Patrick's arrival in Ireland, allegedly. Nonetheless, from the very beginning of recorded Irish history, religion seems to be central to it. And like that, you could pursue that line. But look, with Catholic and Protestant, it does seem as if, unhappily, that seems to be a major feature from the Reformation on. Maybe even the central feature from the Reformation on. A struggle between Catholic and Protestant for primacy on the island, that one can rise and the other must fall. There cannot be no cooperation, there cannot be no co-prosperity sphere or anything of that sort. They have to, one can rise, one must fall. Like the two buckets in a well, as one goes up, the other goes down. And that was the way it has been seen. It may seem unfortunate, but that seems to be nonetheless a fairly accurate summary of the way I think most people would see Irish history as being about Protestant versus Catholics over the last few hundred years. And especially with the Northern Troubles over the last 30-odd years, the whole idea of Catholic and Protestant seems to be front and central. The sectarian dimension to Irish history. Irish history is sectarian struggle, confessional conflict, whatever way you want to put it. And like that, it's not just a matter of legal discrimination against Catholics. We've had talk about the penal laws already. We've had talk about various massacres which take place as well. So it's not just sort of the broad legal constitutional relations between Catholic and Protestant which need to be looked at. We have to look at the rather grubby, grisly, sectarian killings, shootings, massacres, 17th century, 16th century, on through to the 18th, 19th century, tithe war, assassinations, and on through the War of Independence period, and right on up to Northern Ireland in the 1970s and 80s and so on. So on just about every level, Catholic versus Protestant seems to fit the bill. It's the public perception, perhaps not so much in Ireland, but certainly outside Ireland, that is the central dynamo of Irish history, and it thus cannot be ignored. But I think there's rather more to be said about it than that. And I think that on examination, that theme might prove to be rather more superficial than it sounds at first glance. One thing that has to be stated is that Protestant and Catholic don't turn out in sort of team colours, so that one side's wearing sort of one particular colour and the other sides were in the other. It would be great if that was so. If that was so, Irish history would be much simpler to understand. The complexities of Irish history stem from the fact that Catholics are not united and Protestants are not united. Had they been monolithic sort of groups, then things would have been much simpler. They're not. Catholics are divided. There's a sort of a Celtic missionary tradition which vies with the best Rome practices, which keeps Catholics divided, very noticeable in the 16th, very noticeable in the 17th century as well. And of course, Protestants are divided. To the scandal of Protestants, they're divided. As we have heard already today, the Protestants, the Church of Ireland versus Presbyterian. Again, a huge sort of division within Protestantism. And because Protestants know, as anyone knows, division can bring disaster. This is one of the huge nagging doubts for Protestants in Ireland from the time of the Reformation on, that their division offers an entry for Catholics who seem to be coming together in the early 19th century and forming a sort of a bloc. So because Catholics are divided, because Protestants are divided, that's part of the momentum of Irish history. It's not just Catholic versus Protestant, it's because they're divided. And I suppose also, I mean, we've got to figure that, you know, there are certain things which do cause the jaw to drop in Irish history. And that is that at certain points, Catholics and Protestants, however defined, do cooperate together. E.g., 1640, they cooperate to bring down Thomas Wentworth, Earl of Strafford. That Strafford was a most accursed man to all Ireland, Protestant, Catholic and Presbyterian, and they collaborate together to dish the dirt on Wentworth and provide the evidence that brings him to the block in London. Within a year, they're at each other's throats, but there was that moment when they were acting together. And in 1798, the Wexford leaders are mostly Protestant. And yet the rebellion in Wexford looks to have a huge sectarian aspect to it. So the Catholics and Protestants can cooperate together. And of course, we have the example of the North, with Paisley, not now, but Philip Robinson and Martin McGuinness and so on, and you know all about that. Do you realise that, you know, if Ian Paisley had, you know, heaven forfend, fallen under a bus around 1990, and someone had ventured to say, that's a pity, he would be in a power-sharing executive with Martin McGuinness within a matter of a few years, I mean, you would have been laughed out of court. It simply was not possible. Don't get the feeling that Irish history runs on preordained lines. There does seem to be an awful element of predictability about it, but the historian has got to look for the possibilities for a change or a turn, where the unforeseen can happen and the contingent becomes real. And I think the notion of Catholic and Protestants, they're always at it, they're always fighting, that is one of those sort of tram lines that runs a historian into superficiality and really doesn't really make sense of things at all. Let's leave Catholic and Protestant, Ireland and England. Let's look at a question which might have longer legs, a theme that has perhaps more significance. Let's look at the land question. From 1200, I guess, to the 1920s, maybe beyond that, Irish history, you could argue, is the story of the land question. Who owns the land? Who works the land? To have land for most of those 800 years meant to have social authority. To own land for most of those 800 years meant to have political authority. If you did not have land, you had no political authority, you had no social authority. The struggle for the land, the difference between those who own the land, those who work the land, this is the genuine sort of dynamo of Irish history, because this runs on irrespective of the froth of Catholic and Protestant sort of conflict. The deep sort of deeper conflict is that for the land. That is what drives Irish history, and I think that has been argued by very many historians, and I think that's a fair summary of it. We know that that the land question has been presented in the historiography as almost a drama in 3 acts. This first act of the drama was the confiscation, that is, Catholic land owning, from being a majority of the preponderance of the land of Ireland, became a tiny portion of the land. This is, however this was come about, the word confiscation was simply a polite term for theft. And that was the initial act in the three-act drama of the Irish land question. The second act was about the oppression of the landlords, whether middlemen, absentee landlords, rack rents, evictions, the whole shooting, all the rest of it. This was the second act, high rents, rack rents, what have you. And the third act is the triumphant overthrow of the landlord class, brilliantly described by Michael Davitt as the fall of feudalism. And the land question, alone of all the major problems in Ireland, seems to have been a definite success, so to speak. I mean, the partition of Ireland makes the national question kind of messy. The Irish language never did get restored. That's a bit awkward as well. But the land question, the satisfactory resolution of it, that is, the debt paid to history, the grievances of the 18th and 19th century, the tragedies, the horrible scenes from the famine, all of this was wiped away by the redemption of the Land Acts and the unhorsing of the landlord class and the bringing in of a tenant proprietary, and so on. So Irish history, and not for the last time, seemed to have come to an end in a very satisfactory moment, at least where the land question was. So land is going to be a huge aspect, has to be a huge aspect of any history of Ireland, I think. But like that, there are going to be awkward bits about it as well. Recent writing, I need name names, as I said, because they're all in the public domain, but recent writing on the land question has shown what has put forward a rather more favourable aspect of Irish landlords. Again, the whole notion that land is moved from Catholics to Protestants via confiscation and sort of legal subterfuge. Other historians have argued it moves from Catholics to Protestants via purchase. That's the way it's done. That's a major way in which land moves from one side to the other. That again sort of blurs the first opening sort of act in the whole drama of the Irish land question. As for resistance being the central motif in the second act, again, yes, there is some resistance to landlords, but there is much more resistance between tenant and other tenants, between landless and tenant farmers, between those who are opposed to what you might call the invasion of customs or innovation in practices. Tenant against tenant seems to be as much the whole idea. And if you look at the last days of the last years of the Land Acts, very often it's Irish landlords who are lobbying for compulsory purchase, because this gets them out of a jam. It saves them the hassle of going around collecting rent. It saves them the hassle of incurring perhaps assassination if they attempt to do so. And of course, the big negative is that the land is resolved in favour of the sitting tenant. It's not resolved in favour of those who have left Ireland. It goes to the person who's there. So the land for the people was the land for those who are in possession of the land. If you have your tenancy, then you can buy it out. But if you have left to go to Manchester or Manhattan, forget about it, you're gone. And that is a crucial sort of difference, which has sort of tended to undermine the land question.